Afternoon, everyone. My name's Emma Wimpress, and I'm group head of volunteer services now for Northampton General Hospital and Kettering General Hospital. And I'm joined by my colleague here.
Hi everybody, I am Rachel Lovesey and I am Head of Patient Experience and Engagement for Northampton General Hospital. And we are also going to be talking about keeping patients connected during the pandemic. So if we can have our first slide, thank you. So I think really this probably sums up what we've been talking about throughout this afternoon, which is the pandemic versus patient-centered care. So when visiting stopped, we were really concerned about what the impact of that would be on patient-centered care, particularly around involvement of family and friends. If we look at our PICA's 8 principles of PCC, and I spend a lot of time teaching on patient-centered care within the hospital and have done for many years now. So when we heard that visiting was going to be suspended, my first thought was this is going to have a huge impact. This isn't just the case that, you know, somebody's going to miss their half an hour chat with somebody. This is so much bigger than that. This is you know, people being there for emotional support. This is people being there to obviously listen to any information that perhaps patients too poorly to hear at that point. So the biggest thing for myself and Emma was to consider what can we do within our services to make sure that patients keep that connection with their families, with their loved ones. And we basically came up with a set of initiatives.
Okay, so if we talk about virtual visiting, so it was really evident right from the outset that we needed a higher volume of volunteers, which would facilitate some of these initiatives, as well as both the patient experience team, the staff within the hospital, and also ourselves. So the first weekend, we actually recruited 150 volunteers. So the rest of the country was shutting their doors to volunteers. However, at Northampton General Hospital, we opened ours up and we welcomed them in with open arms. The community was absolutely amazing. They were very responsive and they came forward with all different suggestions for us. So within 4 days of visiting being suspended, iPads were configured for video calling. Apps and earphones were taken to all wards, and the patient experience team put a phenomenal pack together, which was really easy to read and really easy to understand for our clinical staff to be able to facilitate these video calls. Our local charity, the Northampton Health Charity, were absolutely phenomenal in gaining more support, and they actually funded a tablet for each ward, so every ward was able to have one device. It was really apparent that the clinical staff wouldn't have the time to undertake or facilitate all of these calls for our patients, so that's where our volunteers stepped up. The service then ran a 7-day service, which is really long hours, to facilitate the video calls. So patients' families were able to contact us from all over the world, and we're able to facilitate these calls for their loved ones. The absolutely amazing thing was that patients were able to connect with their families, and actually it spurred them on to get better, and it gave them that glimmer of hope that they were actually able to talk to people. And our volunteers sat with patients while they actually ate meals with their loved ones on the end of the video calls, and it was just overwhelming. We also were able to facilitate funerals, and although it was incredibly sad, it allowed loved ones to watch their family and friends' funerals via the devices. We purchased larger screen devices, which enabled a bigger screen. It was really hard to sit and watch and facilitate the funerals, but actually the technology and the volunteers and the care and compassion from our staff and from both our teams was amazing. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Emma. So one of the other things that we also did, and I know a number of hospitals set up letters to loved ones, we did a very similar thing. So basically, we initiated an email address that was specifically for people to send emails, letters and photos. These were then printed by the patient experience team and the volunteers and delivered, if received by 3 p.m, the very same day. During the peak, and obviously these things were rolled out really quickly, so we were kind of learning along the way. And the first weekend that we came to, we just couldn't let the weekend go by and these not be printed. So we actually, again, established this as a 7-day service because, well, we had a fear that people would pass away before they received their letters. Again, learning along the way, we started laminating all the letters and photos that went to ITU and HDU because they'd often be handled by multiple people. But again, this is where the volunteers have just been fantastic because they were able to set up a dictation service. So if you're not able to send in an email, you can ring the volunteer service and they will type that out for you. They were also able to set up a readout service. So if a patient is too unwell to read their letter, the volunteers will sit with them at their bedside and read that out. And that really, again, just added so much to the service. At Christmas, we delivered letters on Boxing Day in Christmas cards, only obviously if Christmas was mentioned in the letter, because we don't assume that everybody celebrates Christmas. And we had cards that were donated by Paper Chase. And to date, and obviously this has increased massively now because I wrote this presentation probably about a month ago, and there's 2,500 letters, emails and photos that actually been printed and hand delivered to each patient. Have the next slide, please.
I know Milton Keynes and other services have talked about this, but the patient drop-off was really, really important. And it was one of those things that the senior team came to us and the exec team and said, patients need their their familiar surroundings around them. It could be a dressing gown, it could be a picture, it could be their favourite juice. But how do we allow that to be dropped off in a safer way, but still allow patients to have their belongings around them? So that's where our patient drop-off service became available. So the suspension of visiting obviously was really difficult across the country, but these little things made such a difference to keeping families connected with their loved ones. And it was sometimes we dropped for things like baby scans if the granddaughter had a recent baby scan, and actually the volunteers seeing that patient open it up and being there to support them was a privilege to our volunteers. I know Rachel and myself went out, and so did the teams. It was just really good, and the little things we made a difference. And we both said to our teams, if we can make a difference to one or two people's lives each day, then we know we're doing the right job. We continue to use the local community, the press, the Northampton radio were phenomenal, the local newspapers to promote the service, which allowed patients and their families to keep bringing the things in, so we were able to take them to the patients on the same day. We received so many items of patient property, but we always took pride in making sure they got to the person as quickly as possible, so that loved one or that family member or friend wasn't worrying they hadn't got it. We also encourages loved ones to bring all sorts of things in. It could be a nice smelling pillow or just pictures. So we continued with the drop-off, and we continue to run with it now for those people who don't feel safe coming into the hospital. We also had some really unusual things being dropped off, special teas and different meals, but it was so important that we put the patients at the front of everything we did. And I know our volunteers took absolute pride in everything we did. And there were the other services, the volunteers and the services within the hospital were running. But it was pivotal that we kept reviewing what we were doing, and we ensured that the patient's property was delivered in a really timely manner. Next slide, please.
So I know that these have been mentioned before as well. We had our Connected Hearts, and this was all about supporting bereaved families, because unfortunately not all of our patients made it through the pandemic, and some at the beginning, as has been mentioned, they did pass away on their own. Obviously, as quickly as possible, we set it up so that people would make sure that families and loved ones could be with patients. But this was all about ensuring that connection continued. So all of our hearts, I know this was a question for the previous person, were handmade by the public. We put an appeal out on BBC Radio Northampton. I had to go on the radio, that was really scary. And we received thousands of hearts from our community, with amazing letters as well for the staff, which we obviously shared around. Our hospital charity, again, funded really beautiful packaging, which you can see within the pictures. And we had these small cards with really beautiful words printed to go into the packages. So what happens is when someone passes away, and that's not just from COVID, that's anybody, a heart is placed into their hand, and then the packaged heart is then obviously given to the family or the loved one. We also had contact with funeral directors. I thought that was really important to reach out again into the community, because we knew that obviously if we pop in hearts into hands of the patient that's passed away, that then obviously there was a responsibility for the funeral directors to ensure that that remained with them. And the response was lovely. In fact, we had a couple of people right at the beginning, before we'd properly rolled it out, that actually got in touch and said, we've got families that want hearts, and I hand delivered hearts to funeral directors so that we could make that happen. Yeah, and this is something that we will continue. It's been so well received. We will continue to do this long beyond the pandemic. We have the next slide, please.
I'm just really conscious of time, and I've only got a minute left, and I know Rachel wants to do the closing speech. So feedback was absolutely amazing again throughout the pandemic, but for both services and everyone throughout the trust, this wasn't just about the feedback that we were receiving. We wanted to go above and beyond continuously for our patients, and this feedback was absolutely pivotal for our success, and it allowed our volunteers to know what they were doing, and actually putting themselves at risk and putting themselves forward was actually worthwhile. So we couldn't have done it without our volunteers and without a really supportive patient experience team and volunteer services team. And I'll hand over to Rachel for the final slide.
Thank you, Emma. So reflections and looking forward, embracing technology has definitely been our biggest friend. I think that all of us probably in some way have had to do that, whether it's through learning how to use Teams very, very quickly. Obviously, offering lots of different methods works well for people. So whether that is dropping something physical into the hospital or sending an email, etc., it works. I need to emphasise this. The volunteers are absolutely invaluable. We could not have done all of this without them. They provide that feet on the ground that we just don't have through staff. And, I want to give a big thank you to them and to Emma for coordinating all of that as well. Hospital Charity, again, have been invaluable, funding everything left, right and centre, really, to be honest with you. And I really want to emphasise this as well. Red tape doesn't have to get in the way. Some of these things we would have had meetings after meetings about and probably decided it was too risky, but we just didn't do that. We just got on, we did it, and any issues, which there wasn't any huge issues, we just resolved things. Obviously, promoting things through social media was really positive, and also local media. They really got on board. The local papers, everything. They were so supportive of us. And yes, as I said before, Connected Hearts will continue long beyond the pandemic. And then I think a final slide is just a few pictures from during this time. Thank you, everybody.